come on, seriously? Like, you're just a startup and you're telling me that, you guys do a lot more deep inspection than all these mega companies with large teams. And I finally said, look, the only real way is to out these guys very publicly. So we went and pitched it to Forbes and we said, look, we'll give you access to all the samples that we've created. You can go test it out on your own. And, happy to talk, happy to tell you more.
Hello, everyone. This is your host, Manoj Tandon. Welcome to another episode of Dark Rhiino Security Confidential. And we have a really awesome guest here. But before I tell you who he is, I need you guys to like and subscribe. Hit that like button. Hit subscribe. We're over 160 episodes now almost. And if you want us to keep generating this content, we need to just see a little bit of love from you folks. And not that you guys haven't, but please continue and support us. So our awesome guest today is Mr. Vivek Ramachandran. Some of you who are hardcore in cybersecurity have most definitely heard of him. He is very, very well known, well over 2 decades in this industry. He's a security researcher. He's an author. He's a speaker. He's spoken at DEFCON. He's spoken at BlackHat. He is an entrepreneur. You might remember he is the founder of Pentester Academy. And in his latest work, he's the founder of SquareX, which we will talk about. He has advised government agencies, Fortune 500 companies. He's brilliant, specializes in finding vulnerabilities and threat vectors that are unique. And I'm going to oversimplify that, but we'll get into that. Vivek, thank you so much for joining us on Security Confidential.
Thanks so much, Manoj, for that kind introduction. And yes, super excited to be on the show.
Well, we have to, this has almost become a tradition now that everybody, because cybersecurity is such an eclectic space and it seems people come from all these different backgrounds, they love hearing about, just give us your brief origin story. How did you get in cyber? Like, why not finance? Why not something?
The short version is I was born and brought up in India at a time where you could only be an engineer or a doctor. No, I'm just kidding.
No, you're not kidding, because I know that. And that's kind of, that's the one thing for everybody from the Indian subcontinent. I'm an engineer by training, so I can tell you that is factually correct. And everybody else in my family is a doctor. So just prove the point.
Yeah. But kind of going back, I think this was the year 1999. And interestingly, my dad had gotten me a computer and an internet connection. And those days in India, it was so expensive to even get an internet connection, you wouldn't believe, right? It was $300, $400 a month. Yeah, I was preparing for the IIT exams. And this was the time when I had heard these attacks happen on Yahoo, Alta Vista. I mean, some of us would remember.
I remember that. Yeah.
And there were these massive denial of service attacks, distributed denial of service attacks, which were happening. And I read this news article about a hacker, Mixter, who had actually created a security tool called Tribal Flood Network, which was being used by attackers to bring these massive websites to their knees. So, Manoj, being young, being curious, I was really surprised and thrilled at the same time. I was like, how can someone create this one tool which can bring entire infrastructures down, right? And at that point, I knew nothing of programming, nothing of cybersecurity. Just out of curiosity, I started Googling and finally managed to download that tool, opened it up. It was in a language which looked alien. It was in C, but of course, I knew nothing of C. And then I told myself, why don't I start learning and teaching myself? Because I just felt that this was so much power for one person to have, right? And as a child, as a superhero fan, you're always looking for like something which could give you a very disproportionate power, right? So anyway, I started learning. One thing led to the other. I cracked the IIT exams, went in. Out of a batch of 150, I think 10 people had ever touched a computer. I was one of them. I wanted to keep that lead. So I started teaching myself more and more cybersecurity, and one thing led to the other. But that is really where everything started.
Wow. So you you had a passion for it, and you see that, and you pursued it, which is so different. Like most IITians I know, they are at IIT and then they're getting their MBA from IAM or a very fine institution in the US or the UK. And then they're in the finance sector and
Yeah.
raking it in, which is, but you chose a different path, and you've been very, very successful with it. And if looking at your experience, and this is more as a personal question for some of our younger audience members who would be listening and are contemplating following a passion, following building, starting their own company, what might be a learning or two that you might want to share with them
Yeah.
from your own
Yeah.
experience as someone who's done this?
Yeah. I think, the key learning, if I kind of look back last 20 years, is I think you need to have a lot of patience and believe in the power of compounding. And the reason I say that is, when you're young, your expectations are so high, you want things to happen so fast, right? You put in, a little bit of effort and you're like, hey, I want to see great things happen. So, what I kind of learned was that I think anything big takes a really long time. And for a very long time, everything just looks like a plateau where you feel like you're just doing things in the void and nothing is really coming back, right? You're shouting into the abyss, looking inside, but it's just darkness. And I feel like, if you can somehow go ahead and get over that sense of isolation for a long period where you feel nothing is working and just believe in the power of compounding, I think you start seeing, the fruits of your labor and things start to work out. I'm guessing, you mentioned 150 episodes. I'm sure the first 20 episodes, or the first 5 episodes, it was really just, you, your friends, and whoever you could kind of like, get to listen to it, while now, you have tens of thousands of people listening.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been, for us, you're right. It in the podcast business, I can tell you it's very difficult to get a following and get that consistency, but you just keep at it, right?
Correct.
And for us, this was a passion project. So, at Dark Rhino Security, we were like, we've always been, we focus in the small, medium business space, and those guys are totally neglected. The enterprise gets all the cool stuff.
Right.
And we've always been of the opinion that there is no better way to securing the organization than through at least getting a good foundational education and understanding that you're trying to solve a business problem, not a tech problem, and it's a people problem.
Yep.
And if you start taking that approach, then you'll be ahead of a whole bunch of people. And that's how this podcast came about. And
yeah, fantastic.
And we're fortunate to have great guests who have been able to put their knowledge forward. And a lot of folks probably will not have the opportunity to actually consult with someone of your caliber or to be able to work with you. But now they have access to your knowledge in a small way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always fantastic to learn about origin stories. As you said, like, almost nothing looks like it's going to work till it finally starts working. And then you see the power of compounding over time. So, yeah,
the power of compounding. I think Albert Einstein said compound interest was the most powerful formula in the entire world. I forget what the exact quote was, but it was something to that effect. Yeah, it was something. So let's talk about you. You've been a red team guy long time back, right? And you've looked at attack vectors and have researched them in great detail. When we look at, I was just recently looking at some of the insurance statistics, and that was just because we're involved in that market in a big way. One thing was interesting that came about that, ransomware payments have actually gone down, Vivek, a little bit. Okay, not substantially, but they think they're trending in the right direction. But payments for data exfiltration have remained plateaued and they've been consistent, right? So I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, and this was an insight that happened yesterday, so I would have otherwise put this up before. But any ideas on why that would be the case of someone who's been in that space for an eternity?
Yeah. So I think, one of the things I've seen, over the last 20 years, Manoj, is I think a lot goes unreported as well. And we've seen cases, where the government has gone behind CISOs of very large established companies, where it came out much later that payments were made and disclosures did not happen, right? So one of the things that definitely, and this is just my humble view, and based upon my statistical kind of like feed, which might be completely wrong for what it's worth. But what I feel is there's a lot going on, and there are times when I get to hear through the network that attacks have been happening, and ransomware is kind of one of the main causes. Unbelievably, there are also now companies who act as intermediaries to make payments.
Ransomware as a service is a complete infrastructure.
Correct. And you won't even believe this. There are legit companies where, let's say, if you get hacked by ransomware and you want to make a payment, you can make it look like a service payment to a third-party company, which ends up actually making the actual payment. So in your books, nothing ever looks wrong because it looks like you just paid for some technical service. But going back, assuming those statistics are right, I think what tends to happen is once people get worried about seeing their data online, worried about their final data getting exposed, I feel like things get a lot more real then. And at that point in time, I guess most people would end up thinking, hey, what should we do? And, unfortunately, with such a high pressure situation, most people would end up probably, having an inclination to say, could this be fixed? Could this be covered up? And then we figure out how to probably deal with the regulation. Maybe we say we got hacked, but at the very least, our customers' data isn't like outside with everybody going through it and doing stuff. So I feel there's a lot of psychology here at play. And even though regulation is starting to play a very important role in how probably to handle all of these situations, it is still very jurisdictional in nature, where different jurisdictions have different ways to handle it. And I guess that's the reason why you might probably see this difference in how these data points are trending.
Yeah, that's very, very good insight. But you look at ransomware, the primary, at least statistically, the primary vector is still phishing, right? And that's the mechanism of action, at least. And you mentioned DDoS. We started this conversation with DDoS attacks, which still happen today. Even today, they still happen.
Crazy. Yeah.
Why is it that some of these things, which are so well known, are not still addressed? Why do DDoS attacks still happen? Why, in spite of phishing making headlines almost every day, ransomware, every day there's a new healthcare system that got beat up and their patients can't get service, or a water system can't provide service, or something it's every single day, right?
Yeah.
Yet nothing changes. So
Absolutely. So I think very good question, right? So I'll pick up DDoS first. The big reason that DDoS will probably remain a challenge for a very long time is fundamentally because of how network routing and decisions work. So let's say if, packets are sent destined for you, it's only finally when it reaches Manoj that you decide whether this was even worthwhile traffic or is this garbage trying to fill in my capacity. Unfortunately, all those intermediate routers and infrastructures have no way to know that. And actually, most of DDoS mitigation today works by you literally picking up the phone and telling an upstream provider to start blocking. So you end up calling your ISP and saying, hey, if you're seeing such kind of traffic coming for me, block it right there because I don't need it. The ISP has to now, kind of talk to other upstream providers. So fundamentally, the way the internet works is, routers are supposed to blindly forward based upon the destination and not really take decisions based upon what is inside the packet itself. While DDoS is completely based on the fact that the final destination is going to find this worthless, useless, consumes my pipes. And I feel that's the reason why bandwidth-based DDoS is going to be very, very difficult for a very long time unless there is a fundamental way to quickly tell upstream routers almost in a chain reaction way that don't send this traffic to manoj.com because you know what, he isn't interested in this kind of UDP traffic with this specific payload. Now, the tricky part is that would mean there has to be some kind of chain of trust which goes up, which means now you need a fundamental change in how these protocols propagate and how integrity of what Manoj said is maintained.
Yeah, which is actually a fundamental change that is at the foundational level of the internet, because the original design was that those packets have to get through because it was designed as a nuclear attack is going to happen.
Exactly.
We want to send messages to our other bases. Remember, this is what DARPA originally came out with, right? And that messages had to get through and they would find a route to get to their final destination.
Correct. Absolutely. So I think you're right. The very reason why the internet works so well is also the very reason why DDoS attacks work so well. It is fault tolerant, and you're trying to make a guarantee that somehow we will finally reach the destination, even if it requires changing paths arbitrarily and finding some other way to come. And the second part which you mentioned around phishing, I think that is very interesting as well. Because the primary reason phishing ends up working is gullible users.
Of course.
And there will always be gullible users because new users are entering the web, whether it is younger users, older users within enterprises, for that matter, even as consumers. And the tricky part really is now there is an explosion of third-party SaaS apps, and pretty much we end up doing 90% of our work online, which means we are constantly logging on to third-party services, whether it is CRMs, whether it is our social media management platform and whatnot, which also means, enterprises tend to share accounts even between users. Unfortunately, when it comes to Twitter, unless you're using, Hootsuite or something else to manage, I've seen enterprises have multiple users using the same credentials.
That's a betrayal of a foundational practice in cybersecurity.
Exactly.
And we do use Hootsuite. Emily can testify to that. But that's
and I feel that is really where, Manoj, what's unfortunately happened is I feel till the time the whole world doesn't transition over to an absolute password-less way of authentication, and I know, all the big guys have been trying this for over a decade. Till the time this doesn't happen, I think phishing will continue to exist in some shape or form. And unfortunately, once credentials are stolen, I feel still security products aren't very good at figuring out that something happened till it happens, which is, somebody logs in as Manoj and exports, all the show details. Hey, that's something Manoj would have done as well.
Yeah.
So how do you differentiate?
Yeah, and this brings up, there's a lot to unpack in what you just said. For cybersecurity practitioners, you've opened a rabbit hole. So we'll but we won't go all the way down it. But there's some points there that bear addressing. So when we look at the biggest cybersecurity asset, you mentioned, the people, right? I think this is my opinion, they are the biggest cybersecurity asset, but they are limited to doing phishing quizzes or phishing training or, stuff they really don't give a hoot about, right? They're bored with that. they are never brought into the cybersecurity equation in a real collaborative fashion as partners. It still seems there's a huge focus that this is going to be focused with technology, and what we'll try and do is make things more and more idiot proof rather than train the people and get them to become much, much more aware. Why hasn't that happened? Is there a reason? At least it's our observation that awareness just even today isn't there in a big way.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And I think there are two parts to the problem, right? The first one is, till the time you have an average employee just go through a security training and that ends up being compliance, I think, people are going to click through those screens or have somebody else just do it. I feel first part would be you would have to make the employees feel that there is a sense of accountability if a hack ends up happening because of you. Because that is the only way that you start to feel that this is something very serious.
Okay.
I feel that is very difficult to do, right? Because imagine somebody walks up to you and says, this security awareness training, you better understand what's going on. Because if your email or your identity is the one used for a compromise, either you're going to get fired or you're going to be accountable.
Okay.
Right? Now, that of course creates a sense of, worry, a sense of scare, not the best way to kind of like go about it.
Yep.
But I feel I've been in so many companies where people laugh through these trainings, right? Or, it is so basic because of course you only do it because you want a compliance stick that everybody's gone through it.
Right.
Now, the second part, Manoj, also is what starts to happen is attacks and attackers are getting more and more sophisticated where newer and newer attacks are happening.
Yes.
So the difficult part of that is that imagine today, and I'll give you a very common attack which is doing the rounds, and I feel even most organizations haven't protected themselves.
Okay.
So everybody loves AI, everybody loves the co-pilots, everybody wants to use open AI but not pay for the professional version.
Sure. Now you're giving away your data, but okay. So
exactly. But interestingly, you would find so many of these social media posts where people would say, hey, look at these 4 new services which are better than OpenAI. And in reality, many of them actually have attackers point you to a browser extension where in the backend it is basically OpenAI.
Yep.
And because you're getting free access, employees and individuals are very fast to go ahead and install those extensions. And they can steal your credentials, they can steal your session data. Now, the tricky part is, when this is happening, what do you tell your employees? Do not use AI tools. That's not going to happen. Now, the average employee feels that, he has to keep up with where tools are so that he can use it as a force multiplier. Now, the second order problem is, how do you even teach an employee to look at a browser extension page on Chrome which just blew up? Everybody's talking about it on social media. Hundreds of likes and retweets. We all know which can be faked. And decide whether this is a legit extension to download and install, right? Very difficult for you to have that security view before installing something. So I feel attacks are getting more complex, which means security awareness has a steeper curve. And also which means that every few days you have to go to your employees and say, hey, this is a new attack. Make sure you understand about this. And by the way, don't click through it. You have to seriously do this or you could just get fired. Now, optimizing on both of these dimensions, at least I feel is very difficult.
It is, but then we could also take the proactive cybersecurity tact and say, hey, you know what? This is a hot new AI trend that's coming out that people are going to. So why don't we proactively create a little video snippet or something that if someone tries to plug this into their browser URL, it's going to pop this up and say, hey, Vivek, we know this is a hot topic, but please don't go here because we can tell you that this is really bad. Okay. And your data is going to get stolen. So if you want to do this, go home and on your own personal PC, do whatever it is that you want to do. But please don't do this from the office. We have to stop this.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great point. Unfortunately, Manoj, what's happening, I think most organizations are taking an exactly opposite approach, which is either block everything, which is, what, you shouldn't have access to Chat GPT, and that just makes it a forbidden fruit everybody wants access to.
Then they'll get VPN. You're going to have hidden IT problems, right? You're going to have shadow IT. People will find a way. Look, even China, which is tried to lock down the internet. Even in China, if you want to get out, you can get out.
Correct. Absolutely. And adding to that, it reminds me, when the very first TVs with cameras and microphones had come out, and a lot of people said, I'm never going to buy a television with a camera and a microphone. Fast forward 2 to 3 years, every TV has a camera and microphone. So now you don't have a choice, because if you want to upgrade, well, you just have to live with it.
And so you know what? Most people have not read their license agreements when they unbox that fancy TV. Or actually, that's the part of it. They never unbox it. They have some people that come to their home that takes it out of the box and hangs it up, and they throw out all the stuff. But if you read that license agreement, it clearly states the manufacturer has the right to turn on the camera and the microphone for some legitimate use purposes, whatever that may be, right? And you just sign it away.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right. I think, to your point, that's exactly what enterprises have to realize about AI is, unfortunately, when you use third-party services similar to the TVs with cameras, you have to build safeguards, and the best safeguards is to educate your employees, because there's only so much that DLP is going to help you with.
Oh, yeah. And DLP, you better have somebody full-time on that thing, keeping it updated on a daily basis, or
correct.
It's of limited use, but you know that. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But that was more for the audience. One thing that very interesting, couple things I'd love to get your insight on. I don't know if you followed the story, but the CISO, who was, I want to say he was part of the SolarWinds attack. I hope I don't misstate it, but there's now a federal indictment against him for what happened.
Yes.
So that leads to two questions. First question, should the office, it's the Chief Information Security Officer, I've always kind of felt is really not a CXO title. It's kind of given that, but it's really not that. It's not. It's kind of like in the U.S. at Thanksgiving, it's the kids at the little kids table. That's where you get to sit. You don't really get to sit in the boardroom. So should the CISO's office report directly to the board and not to the CIO? That's one thought there. And then the second, from an accountability perspective, is it really fair that CISOs can be held criminally responsible for breaches that are going to continue to happen? I mean, they're not going to stop just because you up the accountability. What are your thoughts?
No, I think great questions. I think, Manoj, to your very first question, 100%, I actually feel like company boards should start taking security inputs a lot more seriously, and not look at security as an insurance policy you buy and forget about, or something which is, a cost sink. And I feel the only way that a CISO really can speak his mind if he has a seat at the board. And to your point, not just phony CXO title where the C means nothing, right?
Right.
And I feel till the time that doesn't happen and the CISO reports to the CIO or the CTO or the CEO, I think at some level there is pressure to kind of confirm with what the business wants. And generally, I mean, unless you're in the business of security is a cost center and not really a productivity measure, unless of course you have got hacked and that starts to kind of, play with the company's reputation and really your business. So that is one. The second part is a bit tricky, and I'll tell you why. I feel 100% if a hack happens, you really cannot just hold one person accountable, right? Simply because, look, defenders, I mean, game theory, right? Defenders have to win every single time, and attacker only has to win once.
Right. And you're not going to win that every single time. The other side
Exactly.
will get a point.
It is impossible.
They will always get a point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I actually feel like, criminal accountability comes in, only under a couple of circumstances. One is you were very, very aware that this was a very wide gaping hole, which is fairly publicly known, expected to be exploited. And for some odd reason, I mean, you did not bring this probably to the purview of your CEO, your board, and just felt that, what, I could just wait and accept this as a risk, right? Now, I still don't feel that is criminal accountability. You should probably get fired, but maybe not kind of like try to go to jail for it.
Right.
The second, of course, is, probably, if I remember, I don't remember the story properly, but if I recall, there were some cases where the CISO ended up sweeping this under the carpet, where ransom was actually paid, and this was kept out of the books. And the whole payment was actually shown in a different way.
Right. And there's no way that CISO could have done that without the
himself.
CFO, the COO, the CEO directing or being totally a part of that activity. That title doesn't have the power to do it.
And the best example I can give you is, way back in the financial crisis, like who was finally held accountable in all of these banks? With all that subprime mortgage and every single thing, right? Somebody decided to just say, what, we can layer these up and this is now AAA quality. But somehow, the bank CEO, the heads of the departments, they absolutely had no clue, and they produced some emails that some manager 4 levels down just decided to take that decision all by himself.
Yeah, sure. I don't believe it, but yeah, I know what you're saying. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
It would seem to me that the amount of revenue in that example that was being generated from those financial vehicles, it's impossible for me to believe that the CEO, the CFO were not 100% aware of where all this cash was coming from and what racket was being run.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And 100%, because look, when is the time that you ever heard a CISO that he was given an unlimited budget to do whatever he wanted?
No. And when, and I've seen it in, I've told this story here multiple times, but I'm going to say it again. So audience, please forgive me. It's a story of a major movie house, right?
Okay.
And I always like picking on this because this is a major motion picture producer. And you and the audience and the whole world, I will not mention their name, you have absolutely 100% seen their products in the theater, okay? In their instance, they had multiple CISOs, not one CISO. It's a Fortune 100 company, right? I mean, and they had really good security in each one of these layers, but when their final product got to the cutting room floor, which in the old days was actual film that people were cutting up and splicing together and editing it to make the final product, those guys didn't have much protection whatsoever. They were just doing all the work out in the open, and the databases they were storing the final productions on, if you knew how to look for them, you didn't need anything. You just go in there and FTP it. Just take it.
Crazy.
So you think about a company that spent $100 million on a major motion picture, and then some kid just downloads it and distributes it before it's... Now, luckily it didn't happen, but even in a major company like that, somehow the controls were missed. that would have created the accountability for that. And that's not a laughing matter, but I mean, we joke about it, but it shows that even if you are a really large corporation and you have multiple CISOs, they don't have visibility to everything that's really going on and where all the assets are that need to be protected.
No, absolutely. And you bring up a good point, right? At the very same time, what I found is, I think even the security policies aren't always applied uniformly. And what I mean by that is, if you look at a lot of the C-level executives, they would actually want you to allow them to do a lot more than the rank and file employees.
Yep.
Opening up wide holes right there. So what tends to really happen is now the CISO is managing multiple user groups with extremely diverse policies and hoping something doesn't slip through. And this is something I've seen so many times. We talk to potential customers and they say, hey, by the way, this is wonderful. You can apply all of these policies. We'd love to get all of this visibility, but I'd like to exclude these 25 people. And what I generally tell a CISO is, you damn well hope that these guys know what they're doing when they're online, because these are also the most vulnerable folks who everybody would want to attack.
That's right. And you better make sure that their data is already not out, because chances are it is. And we'll just reuse the password, or can we social engineer them, as MGM found out the hard way, right? As to what can happen. I want to turn your direction a little bit into, I think you had an article or a story in Forbes about findings you had on Gmail and Outlook or whatnot. Give us a little bit of insight onto vulnerabilities that, Vivek, you found.
Yeah. So I think, as a startup, Manoj, when I start talking to a lot of prospective customers and I tell them about, hey, you know what, you use Google Workspaces, you're using, Office 365, Outlook.com. And I tell them, those platforms don't end up scanning files as exhaustively and comprehensively as you think. Now, imagine the response most of them give me. They're like, come on, seriously? You're just a startup and you're telling me that, you guys do a lot more deep inspection than all these mega companies with large teams. And I finally said, look, the only real way is to out these guys very publicly. So we went and pitched it to Forbes and we said, look, we'll give you access to all the samples that we've created. You can go test it out on your own. And, if you feel that this is a credible threat, happy to talk, happy to tell you more.
Okay.
So that is really how that exclusive article happened, where we went out there and actually showed how trivial is it today for attackers to actually send you malicious Office documents with malicious macros and things like that, which completely can evade, scanning technologies of almost all webmail providers. And 90% of mail is opened via webmail today, right? 10% applications like Outlook.
Yep.
So that is really how we kind of and that was the main motivation for that research, really.
Wow. And did you get any backdraft from that from the likes of Google or Microsoft?
So interestingly, I think some small things were fixed, but I think they never publicly acknowledged that this was picked from our report or anywhere. You know how difficult it is to reach out to many of their teams because their emails are like sinkholes.
Yeah.
You send an email, you never get a response. So many of them flat out denied that we have ever reached out to them. But some things were fixed. We tried to do, further testing, and we figured out that those were really just band-aid approaches. And at its core, I think here is the reason why, right? If you look at a provider like Gmail or Outlook, they are looking at probably millions of emails a minute, possibly, right? With a large majority of them having attachments. Now, one can only imagine if you started doing deep inspection, how much of computing power that would end up taking.
Yeah.
And I feel this is really where a large number of these providers feel like it isn't worth doing that for every single document.
Yeah.
And the simple reason is they're just burning their own money. So what are they good at? if a document is already caught by one of the larger providers and the hash is blacklisted in a threat feed, that is 100% blocked. But the moment an attacker makes even minute changes, completely evades. You won't believe, one of the examples we give Forbes is you could take a malicious document, or at least some, and literally go in and just change the author name, and the document goes through because all they were looking at was hashes, and the hash changed when you change the author name.
But you should have other email filters on that, and you should be using some kind of behavior detection engine at least layered in on top of that. That's configured properly, because that's another thing that we run into. We see it all the time where people tell us, and we're in a totally different space than you are, Vivek, that, we use Amazon, we use Microsoft, we use Google, and they take care of our security. I'm like, have you actually read your fine print on the contract?
Exactly.
They're securing the platform. They're not securing your data.
That's a very good point. That's a very, very good point. And I think a large number of customers either misunderstand or happily overstretch the responsibilities of cloud providers and cloud security companies, because that's such an easy way to pass the buck along, right? And say, you know what, I actually thought like Google Workspaces tells me that it scans every email, and that's the reason why I didn't do anything beyond that.
Yeah.
So this was the time when you could buy a Cisco or an IBM product and say, if Cisco's product went down, what the hell do you expect me to do?
That's right. And nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. That's one of the oldest sayings in the book, right?
Correct.
Right.
And it still works today, for what it's worth. Yeah.
It does work today. But I want to, address one more thing, and then I want to get to SquareX, because that's a very interesting project you have, and we want to make sure the audience understands a little bit better. But when you look at these we've talked about these vulnerabilities that continue to persist, whether it was DDoS or phishing, or there's many attack vectors, and they're going to continue ongoing. One of the things with vulnerabilities is that they come out, and you look at a company, they typically, for a critical patch, if they're good at it, will say we have 30 to 60 days to address it. But bad actors can actually, once that vulnerability is known, it takes them typically 5 days to create an exploit for it, a technical exploit.
Yeah.
Is there any thoughts on closing that gap? On the one hand, the bad guys can leverage it in 5 days. The good guys are publicly saying we're not going to address it we're going to address it in 30 to 60 days. To me, this is like a formula for disaster at some point. And your thoughts on can we affect that change?
Yeah. So I feel like, it is difficult, and here's the reason why, right? And now, of course, with all of these code generating AI LLMs, the moment you get to know a CV description, you could literally feed the code of the vulnerable product and maybe even have the LLM build out stuff. So I think, when attackers build attack code, I think these are proof of concept codes that you're building. And now with LLMs, you can iterate a lot faster. And one of them has to work where dozens of attackers are probably collaborating in the dark web. And when one works, they just sell it to the other, and the whole thing just ends up exploding, right? The tricky part with the patches is that when you patch a software, you also need to do regression testing. You need to make sure nothing else is breaking. And when you release that patch, it is going to affect probably thousands of your customers.
Yeah.
So the bar for a larger company when it comes to issuing a software update is a lot higher versus an attacker to develop a proof of concept code which just has to work. Now, the only way, Manoj, I feel this can happen is when companies have dedicated task forces, in the development teams to look at vulnerabilities and make that high priority. And customers also have to participate there, where customers have to be willing to go ahead and deploy experimental patches while a very rigorous testing exercise is still underway, which means they are also accepting the risk that, look, I got this patch 2 days after an attack was generated. This is a risky experimental patch and something could go wrong. The vendor is still, kind of like testing all possible edge cases with the patch. So I feel if that is something a lot of companies can accept, it may be possible for a large number of these security product companies to maybe issue patches early.
Yeah, very, very good points. I think it's there's some real practical issues with that, with what you've just described, right? To make that work.
And I still remember, I used to work for Cisco Systems like almost 2 decades back. And sometimes we would go ahead to try to solve like what they call like a severity 0 issue, which means the visibility is there till the business unit head. And you would deploy a patch and that would end up breaking 5 other things. And then you would literally have to work overnight.
Yeah. And see, a lot of that gets to how we do quality assurance testing in software development lifecycle. And, it's a very simple trade-off. You want to get to a product that you can monetize very quickly. And if you're going to delay it because of foundational changes you want to make in architecture or because of security reasons or incorporate security things in, the security people tend to lose that fight. It's like,
right, very true.
get the product out because we want to make money, and the VCs want to see a return on it. It's a vicious cycle, which again gets to the holding the CISO as the sole party accountable. I think that's a little bit of a overstretch in some.
Absolutely. I mean, you kind of making him the fall guy. Simple as that.
Yeah, somebody has to be. So let's talk about SquareX. What is this project? Give our listeners a description of what's going on here.
Yeah. So Manoj, like my background has always been that of an attacker. The previous companies I did was all like attack training and all.
Yeah.
And that was the time when, I was talking to Fortune 500 red teams, and they always used to ask me for ways by which they could show bypasses of security products because they wanted to understand how attackers would work.
Okay.
And a recurring theme which always used to come is, hey, you know what? Like we have a lot of defenses sitting in the cloud, but what about all of these thousands of employees, who are now spread all over? Now there's hybrid work. Is there any way that we could end up showing that our employees are vulnerable and attackers could target them to get keys to the kingdom? And, nowadays, if you think about it, almost all employees hold so much of company data in their own personal laptops and devices, in their cloud accounts, in their cloud storage, that compromising, just 1 or 2 of them could actually give you pretty much data maybe for the whole department.
Yeah.
Now, that is really where the key realization which started coming is, look, what is the application that all employees use to kind of do their work? Well, it's the web browser. 90% of your time is really spent on the browser because everything is SaaS, everything is in the cloud. 10% in applications like Outlook, where you finally just click a link and go into the browser anyway. So I started looking into, what kind of web security is available today. And that's really where, secure web gateways, part of SASE and SSE, was the way that we were filtering, web attacks. Now, SASE, SSE, secure web gateways started almost like a decade back. Web applications were very simple at that point. You could probably still look at network traffic of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and say, you know what, here's the bad attack.
Yeah.
But now, apps are a lot more complex. You have progressive apps. Everything is run by APIs. You have a thin client talking to APIs, reconstructing the UI all the time. Browsers are complex beasts. Now, web browsers are even more complex than operating system code, right? Because literally they run so many disparate technologies. So I think we figured out, and this is actually a main stage DEFCON talk that we are doing this year.
Okay.
Which is secure web gateways can be completely subverted and bypassed by attackers to even deliver common malware. So our thesis really was, where do you now go ahead and detect these web attacks? And if you think about it, any security product, if it has to do a good job, needs to have complete visibility into all metrics.
Yep.
Now, if you want to solve client-side web attacks, the best place is the user's browser, because look, you have access to all the rich DOM events, you have access to user interactivity. You know how the UI is finally rendered, which means UI redressing attacks and all of that are easy to detect. And if you had to in real time ship all of this data to the cloud, and there you run your algorithms, this is prohibitive, because now you are literally sending megabytes of data on every tab back to the cloud.
Yeah.
So we figured that solving client-side web attacks was best done in the browser, because you have the best metrics right there. So that is really how SquareX was born. And the whole idea was, can we detect, mitigate, threat hunt web attacks happening against your employees in real time in the browser by deploying a browser native security agent where even your detection algorithms, policy enforcement, ML algorithms, all of that can actually run entirely in the browser. And that is really what SquareX is all about.
What does that do? I'll ask the dumbest question you're ever going to get.
Yeah.
What does that do to the user's browsing experience? Is this slowing them down? Is it adding a lot of overhead to the...
Great question. So I think, the moment any security team hears one more agent, everybody freaking fears out, the swear words start coming and all of that, right? And that is really where, I'll give you a very interesting insight. So let's say you have your Chrome browser open and you have 25 tabs and you're in one active tab as a single user.
Okay.
What modern browsers start doing is they start putting a lot of the other browser tab threads to sleep slowly, given if there is inactivity. At the very same time, WebAssembly is this technology which has slowly been maturing over the last few years, which allows you to run a lot of native code within the browser itself at very high speed without slowing things down in a sandboxed way, also making it very secure. So interestingly, Manoj, the net load when it comes to running these detection algorithms in the browser is actually very, very lightweight, because my load compared to a secure web gateway processing millions of requests per second is just Manoj on the browser on one active tab and a couple of other tabs which are slowly going inactive. So we've done a lot of benchmarking, and I can tell you, even in comparison, if you had deployed a security agent like endpoint security, we end up using a fraction of CPU and resources. Now, here's the best part. Because we deploy as a browser extension, Chrome itself actually acts as a security gateway to ensure that we don't consume too much of resources, or else Chrome kills us, because Chrome doesn't want to be a bad browser consuming crazy amount of resources because we, are a runaway code doing crazy things. So overall, in benchmarking, it's been super lightweight to run these algorithms in the browser itself.
So, is the agent calling to a massive cloud infrastructure for processing, or is it all being done at the endpoint itself?
So almost 90% of everything we do is in the endpoint, while talking to a couple of backend APIs for threat feeds and a couple of other things. And that is really where the disruptive innovation is in a way, this is kind of like endpoint computing happening right there in the browser, detecting attacks which otherwise would never be possible, given the sheer amount of data that you'd have to sync in real time to the cloud for the detection to work.
That's very cool. So have you patented this approach?
So we are applying for, a bunch of patents at this point. Of course, patenting itself is a very long process.
Right.
But I feel we found a lot of interesting things, because look, the browser wasn't originally meant to be a development platform where you're building multiple lines of products, right?
Right.
So we've discovered a lot of tribal knowledge as we went through this, as we started understanding the shortcomings of building a product running in the browser. And I think a lot of that tribal knowledge is what we kind of would love to patent, because many of them are very non-trivial observations, which in comparison to the cloud, Amazon gives you a bunch of APIs to call into, serverless and whatnot, and you go build there.
Right.
Versus a browser where so many things are undocumented.
Can you give us an example of some of these an example of a non-trivial finding that you can share?
Yeah. So I'll give you an interesting one, right? So let's say there is, and I'll give you a broad view and then kind of drill down as to like how the attack detection would work. So let's say a malicious actor is targeting multiple employees in your company via LinkedIn.
Okay.
And on LinkedIn, he's actually sending a DM to everybody saying, hey, I'm actually a recruiter. And one of the other competing companies in the space is willing to offer a 40% increment. And by the way, click on this link to go download the job description and let me know if you're interested.
That's too easy. You made it too easy for people to click on it. Because
and now what happens is, people click through those, and maybe in the very end you have an Office document where the job description is there, and you end up downloading it, and maybe that has a malicious macro which downloads and executes ransomware, right?
Okay.
Now, if you're lucky, your endpoint security system ended up picking it up, and you see in your endpoint security system that all it says is Tom, Dick, and Harry downloaded this malicious Office document via the Chrome browser. Now you run to Tom, Dick, and Harry and ask them, hey, what the hell really happened? And either they don't remember or they don't want to remember. And today, this is really where state of the art is. And all secure web gateways can tell you is the final endpoint from where something was downloaded, which honestly attackers put up these random websites and bring them down all the time. So now, as a browser security agent, we want to cover that entire visibility gap. So what SquareX does, and then I'll tell you how we do it, is literally you could go inside SquareX and it can tell you, you know what? On LinkedIn, this was the fake profile which ended up sending DMs to Tom, Dick, and Harry. They ended up clicking on the DM and went through these sites A, B, and C. And then a document with a macro in it, which was deemed malicious, was downloaded. Here is the hash. And by the way, we are auto-remediating this for the entire organization.
Oh.
Now, and this is exactly what we do today. Now, the tricky part is, how do you figure out all of this? How do you figure out that this was via DM, right? So this is really where we need to do a deeper integration and understand the structure of LinkedIn, understand the structure of most popular websites, because that's the only way that I can tell you that this happened via LinkedIn, via a DM, and here is the profile. Because if you're just looking at surface level metrics, it just happened via a website, and that isn't good enough.
Right.
Now, one of the things that we also do, Manoj, is something called attack vision. You turn it on, we can literally recreate how the user screen looked like all through the attack. So almost like screen recording, but we aren't recording the screen. Now, to do all of this, we need to really understand, once a user opens the tab, how is the DOM, which is the document object model, and that is nothing but a hierarchical tree holding that data structure of everything related to the page, and which is constantly changing probably hundreds of times a second, depending on what you're doing. So if you record every single thing, that's dozens of megabytes probably in just a second. Makes it absolutely prohibitive.
Microsoft plans on doing that, though, with their recall product, right?
Exactly. Right. And you know why, right? Like, because of course, apart from the memory and the CPU, there's almost a crazy amount of other issues which come in.
Right.
So the innovation we did in this specific example is how do you go ahead and record events and snapshots where you're able to recreate without ending up recording every single change? And the best example I can give you is when you look at online video, you have this notion of keyframes, and between keyframes, you try to not record everything, but when a keyframe changes in a video, which is drastically something changes, you do a snapshot once again.
Yeah.
So, we kind of took a lot of interesting cue points on how video is rendered, how things are happening, and then came back and said, well, how do you do this in a way where you can actually go ahead and recreate what really happened without recording everything? So these are key innovations which we've done in kind of technologies running entirely in the browser, which we are actually patenting.
Wow, that is very, very cool. And
thank you.
For our listeners, you guys heard it here. So that is a very cool description. And you're going to be presenting this on the main stage at DEF CON this year?
So at DEF CON, what we are going to do is, bring down old gods, which is bring down secure web gateways. And I feel like that's been like a draconian, arcane, Stone Age technology somebody had to call out. And, on the main stage at DEF CON, we are going to be releasing frameworks, which every single Gartner Magic Quadrant, hitting all the way up, in the final quadrant, all of those vendors are completely vulnerable too. These are architectural vulnerabilities, which means you really can't patch them. This isn't software vulnerabilities. And we hope this forces the entire industry to rethink how web security is being detected and blocked when it comes to end users.
That's awesome. You're really looking to make a lot of friends, Vivek.
Yeah. Yeah. And hey, that's the fun part of being in this industry, right?
Heck yes.
I mean, you have to rock the boat. I know there's going to be a lot of furniture moving, during that talk, but
that's awesome.
Hopefully it'll be fun. We don't get sued.
To heck with it. We've been there, done that. And nothing comes of it. I can even tell you that. So, so that's fantastic. I know we have kept you actually quite a bit past what you had committed us from time, but I want to give you a minute or two. Anything you want to plug, any other appearances and things, whatever you'd like our audience to know about.
Yeah, I think so. Go to SquareX.com, SQRX.com. We're going to put out a lot of these vulnerabilities that we've discovered, a lot of things that you might not know about, many security technologies you take for granted, right? Just like the, email scanning one, the secure web gateway one. And I feel like, the way we are approaching this is quality security research, looking at vulnerabilities and trying to build products which are solving against it. So if you're interested in working with us, whether vulnerability research, building products, feel free to send me an email. I'm Vivek@sqrx.com, or, connect with us on LinkedIn or any of our social media channels. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Well, Vivek, we didn't really address the questions that we had. So, but, hopefully,
no, this was better.
Yeah. Hopefully we can get you back here at some time in the future and get an update from you. Yeah. Don't be a stranger, but this was fascinating. And really, really appreciate you taking the time so late in the day in your part of the world to join us.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Manoj. I think, this was a great conversation. And look forward to being on the show once again sometime in the future.